everyone. We are live and recording. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to this evening's virtual event with Jana Marcus. My name is Corel Centers and I'm the events director here at Bookshop Santa Cruz, where I'm broadcasting live from my desk. And here at Bookshop, we know there's a lot going on in the world right now with both the global pandemic that has changed our way of life and with this renewed movement for racial justice and equity that is once again filling our lives with the urgent message that Black Lives Matter. As a bookstore, our values are aligned with the fight against ignorance and for inclusion and representation. And while author events can allow us to sort of shift in focus from these difficult topics, we also really appreciate how books, especially the one tonight and the authors behind them, are always in some way in pursuit of the truth. So we see these talks as a way to deepen and refresh in order to return to the vital work that is before us. And we appreciate you taking time to do that with us tonight. So tonight we're thrilled to welcome Jana Marcus, a local treasure who has written a riveting new book, and Santa Cruz's own Wallace Baine, who will be in conversation with Jana tonight to discuss Line of Blood. And their discussion will be followed by a Q&A. Jana Marcus is the author of 2 photo documentary books, In the Shadow of the Vampire, Reflections from the World of Anne Rice, and Transfigurations, which I have right behind me, and which received the Gold Award for Best LGBT Nonfiction Book of 2012. By the Independent Book Awards in New York. And we do have copies of that also available in the store right now. Jana is a multi-award winning photographer based in Santa Cruz County, and Wallace will tell you more about her, but these are the brief details. And tonight, Jana will be in conversation with Wallace Baine. Wallace has been an arts writer, film critic, columnist, and editor in Santa Cruz for more than 25 years. He's the author of A Light in the Midst of Darkness, which is a cultural history of this very independent bookstore, Bookshop Santa Cruz. He's also the author of the book Rhymes with Baine, Belabored Humor and Attempted Profundity, and the story collection The Last Temptation of Lincoln, which we also have copies of in the store, and which has a very touching picture of Wallace on the back, very fun. And Wallace is a staff writer for Good Times, Metro Silicon Valley, and San Benito South Valley Magazine. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Jana and Wallace to the screen.
Thank you, Corel.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Good evening. I'm going to go ahead and close my window, and oops, we're getting some frozen stuff. Oh, funny. I'm going to tell folks to refresh their screens, and I'm just going to give it one moment. I'm showing an operational system from my end, so hopefully it comes through. So do you guys mind just waiting one moment while I make sure everything's working?
Hey, we're back.
I was like so ready to fire Crowdcast and never ever come back. So I'm guessing that everyone missed the entire introduction, which is fine. It doesn't matter. All I was saying was chat is on the right. Ask a question is right down below. Please purchase the book by clicking on the green button below the screen. That is what powers our events and keeps us going. Thank you to everyone who's already donated. I imagine a lot of folks here know who Jana is and know who Wallace, know who these wonderful folks are. So I'm not going to read through your intros again, but I'm going to go ahead and let you guys take it away. Does that work for you?
Sure. Let's get started.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much, Corel. Good evening, Wallace.
Good evening, Jana Marcus. I'm thrilled to be here with you to talk about your new book, Line of Blood. Let me see if I can remember the wordy subtitle: Uncovering a Secret Legacy of our favorite 3 M's, right? Murder, money, and mobsters.
Yes.
Jana is here tonight because she was not nominated on the Democratic ticket for vice president.
Thank God.
Next time, Jana. But that means she's here to talk about her book. I recently interviewed her for a story that we did on the cover of Good Times a couple of weeks ago now. And it was really kind of an examination of the book because it works on so many different levels as a family story, as a true crime story. I guess I want to start with you, Jana, because this book has kind of taken a huge part of your adult life. I mean, you can date back the first traces of it almost 3 decades now. Tell us what it's like standing at the summit after that long climb up the mountain.
It's almost hard for me to believe that the book is done and that it's out. It was 28 years of my life investigating this story. And then it was many years in editing and dealing with different publishers. So it's been a huge process on every front. But a part of me is a little sad, when something has taken up half of your life and it's been a mystery that's just become obsessive, and you just keep going and going, trying to put the puzzle pieces together. When it was actually over, it was a little sad. I wasn't sure how to say goodbye to my great uncle Abe, or to the memory of my father that this journey helped keep alive, and my wonderful team of investigators who worked with me. Like, it was wonderful and sort of sad when it was over.
The central character in your book, Line of Blood, is a man by the name of Abe Babchick, who died in 1941. He was murdered, as a matter of fact, in New York City. He was the brother of your paternal grandmother, and trying to figure out what happened to Abe was really sort of the driving force of this entire journey, and it kind of led you through your family history. Let's begin by I'm sure a lot of our guests here are old enough to have lived a life pre-internet and know what it was like trying to research in the days before the internet. You had an interest in genealogy as a young person, right?
I was fascinated in genealogy. I don't even know why. I mean, usually people aren't interested in that until later in life, but I was fascinated with genealogy, and was actually really interested in my grandparents' generation, what their journey was like from the old country to the new country. On my mother's side of the family, my grandmother on that side openly told us many things and many adventures about her living in the old country and coming to America, and her parents and our great-great-grandparents. But on my father's side, we really had no information. I only knew his mother, who was my grandmother, Grandma Ray. And we really didn't, we lived 3,000 miles away from the New York clan, so we really didn't know much about them. But when I started asking questions, nobody wanted to talk to me. They were all very silent about everything.
And that made you more and more curious.
I'm sorry?
That just made you more and more curious.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I think as a young adult, you just sort of take some things for granted that are told to you. Like, grandma was married 5 times. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess people get married 5 times. Like, I just assumed that was okay. That was the way it was, But the curiosity was piqued to the umpteenth degree in 1988 when I was 26 years old. And living in New York at the time, and had gone to grandmother's house to get ready for a family dinner. And in my usual fashion, when we were done, setting the table and helping her cook, my sister and I would often go into her bedroom, where the bottom drawer of her dresser was stuffed with jewelry and photographs and papers. And it was this fun place we used to call her secret drawer, that we just loved to look through for whatever fun little remnants of history we could find. And on this one particular day, I discovered a newspaper article stuffed way in the back, inside an envelope that had never been seen before. And it wound up being about a murdered mobster in 1941. I didn't recognize his name. I didn't know who he was. And so I started asking the family, and, well, great chaos ensued, beating of chests and screaming and slamming doors. Don't ever say his name. And I said to my father, who was this? And came to find out it was my grandmother's brother. And the family really had taken some sort of code of silence to just never mention his name and never talk about him. And so my father knew very little about him. what he did know was not the truth, or was partially the truth. And so that really started our investigation. And we decided to find out who was Uncle Abe, who murdered him.
I want to introduce your father a little bit also, because he is a very well-known figure here in Santa Cruz. It was, of course, Morton Marcus, who passed away in 2009. He was a longtime teacher at Gabriel, a poet, a writer, a raconteur. He was kind of a larger-than-life figure, and he assumes a big part in this book. He was kind of a co-conspirator with you, right, in trying to find out the details of what happened to Abe?
He was, and my father, in his poetry at the time, he was writing a book of poetry called Pages from a Scrapbook of Immigrants, which was about his family's journey to America at the beginning of the 20th century. And so he was always interested in family history, and he really had none himself. My father had been sent away to boarding school at the age of 3 by his mother, who had divorced his father, and he was never allowed to see his father. So my father, Mort, basically had no parents. And so he also was very curious about Uncle Abe. He had always been told he was a restaurateur and a gambler who had been killed, and that was all he knew. So pre-computer, we started our investigation basically, at the New York City Public Library and the municipal archives, which were really the only way to access records at that time,
And what was driving you was, you weren't thinking about making a book out of this at that time, right?
Oh. No, we just wanted to know my father had a very lonely childhood, and so I think he really craved a sense of history, and so did I. I wanted to know who was his family, where did we come from, what was it all about, and now suddenly we had this murdered gangster that we needed to find out about. So it was very slow in the beginning, the finding out about Great Uncle Abe really kind of just little pieces of information eked out here and there, but it was a very long process. Once it got into the 2000s and the computer era was in its midst and Ancestry.com was online, suddenly records started to become available, and I was able to do some research. But it just, it took years for more information to become available.
And the other character in the book, of course, is your grandmother. She was not helpful in this quest. Am I right?
No. I think every immigrant generation feels like, why do you want to know about the past? Look to the future. That's what both my grandmothers would always say. Who cares? Think about the future. Move forward. And, one thinks, well, were they painful tales? Painful tales of working in sweat houses, the familiar immigrant stories. But I found out they were a heck of a lot different, Wallace.
Now, your father told you a story about a phone call that came to the house from a man. Tell us about that and what was said in that.
Well, as our research went on and sort of ebbed and flowed over the years, some relatives did feel like they could start to open up and say a few things, and mostly that was my father's cousin Leo, wonderful, exuberant man who loved to tell tales of Jewish mobsters and the old days in Brooklyn, and would sprinkle in little stories about Uncle Abe and his brother Uncle Frankie, and then as people started to pass away in the family, I think and the years went by, I think people started to feel a little more safe to talk about it. And what Leo told my father was that when Abe was killed, the family received a phone call that said, if anyone tries to find out what happens to Abe or what happened to Abe, we'll kill the whole family, starting with the children. And that was terrifying. And that became my father's reasoning for why he was sent away to boarding school at such a young age. And my uncle Leo, or cousin Leo, I call him Leo, he always sent his daughters away to camp in the summer. As he said, no bad chick relatives should be hanging around Brooklyn if they don't have to be. And I think for decades afterward, the family was terrified. And of course, as we found out, there was another brother. Abe had a brother who disappeared. trying to find out who killed Abe. And so now we had 2 cold cases in the family, 2 killed brothers. The family was terrified.
Now, this was many, many years after when you were kind of on the trail here, but still, was there a moment where you said, you know what? I don't know. This is feeling New York City monsters. We've already gotten one ominous warning. Dad, maybe let's focus on something else.
I'm funny like that, Wallace. When I am working on a project that I'm driven, I just kind of go for it. But it was my father who reminded me a number of times, hey, you don't know who these people are. You don't know who's connected to who. We don't know who killed Abe or why, and so in the early days. And so he did remind me that I needed to be careful. And there were moments because I did a lot of cold calling people and tracking down potential leads of people who knew people. And there were moments where I thought, oh, wait, what am I doing? Like, I don't really know who these people are. What if they actually know something and I'm putting myself out there, So, once or twice I got a little nervous.
One of the things I found fascinating about the book is that your timeline here has a shape to it, right? I mean, it begins with you going after this story in earnest. Your dad in the 2000s gets very, very ill, and he eventually passes away. The story kind of died with him for a while there, didn't it?
Yeah, my father and I were very close, and when he became ill and then passed away, it was devastating for me, and I really lost all interest in trying to finish this. And as I write at the end of one of the chapters, I realized I had just spent years and years of my life trying to understand who my family was, who had died many years before I was even born. I had all these pictures of dead relatives, and I was trying to string their lives together almost to make sense of my own. And I couldn't face my father's death, and I just decided, I'm done. I don't have anything to give to this. And I just put it all away.
For several years.
For 5 years.
5 years. What happened to revive it?
It's one of those strange, sometimes real life is stranger than fiction, Wallace, and 5 years after my father's death, I got a very strange and mysterious phone call from someone who claimed to be the daughter of great Uncle Abe's.
I hope it was better than the last phone call. I mean, it wasn't threatening your life or anything, right?
No. It was a mysterious, no threats. But it was the daughter of Uncle Abe's chauffeur, who was there the night he was killed. And how she got my information, I will never know. Why she called me then, of all times, it was a sign. It was definitely a sign. And I met with her and we talked, and I realized it was also a time in my life where I had just been laid off from my longtime job at Cabrillo. I had time on my hands. I was looking for something to do. I wasn't quite sure what it was. And the phone call from this woman sort of re-sparked everything for me. And I realized, you know what? I have the time to do this. I have to finish this investigation. I put too much of my life into it. And it was a way for me to stay connected to my father too. I realized that was going to be important. So I picked it up again, and there were so many new avenues of
a team, right? You had a team of helpers.
Well, there were so many news sources available online. There were Freedom of Information Act papers I could file with the FBI. There was all kinds of things. And I decided that it was time to get serious and actually put together a team, my ragtag team, as I like to call them. And I started working with a friend of mine who was a retired detective with the NYPD. I had a number of cousins. Cousin Michael and Cousin Jared were working with me, my sister Valerie. I had a wonderful friend named Eric, who's an incredible researcher who was helping me do research. And we brought along a crime scene psychic, the wonderful Maria, who is an amazingly gifted psychic who I had met maybe 20 years earlier when I was doing my first book. And I hadn't spoken to her in 20 years. And oddly enough, you know, it's funny. I am a skeptic. I'm a skeptical believer. That's what I call myself, because I believe that these things are real, but they have to kind of be proven to me, because I know there's a lot of people out there kind of making a buck on people's pain. But as I was thinking about this, I remembered Maria remembered me. She contacted me that she had felt that something was pushing her to connect with me. And I thought, oh my God, how weird is this? And I said to her, you know, I'm investigating a murder in my family. Maybe you could help me out with this. And she said, don't tell me anything. Let me come and see you. And she came and saw me, and we had an amazing session where she told me things that had taken me years to find. And she knew nothing, no names. She didn't know what any of this was about. And immediately became an important part of the team, where we then went on to have many on-the-ground investigations that were very exciting.
I'm trying to determine which story is more fascinating, the story of Abe way back in the 40s, or the story of you finding this out. I mean, this is incredible. Now your team came together, including the psychic, and you went to New York. And
well, in the course of doing all of the research, I had found a number of eyewitness reports from the night of his death, and so we knew where Abe had been his last night of his life. This is, of course, after many years of researching this. We knew where he was last seen. We knew before he was supposedly abducted and then later found murdered in his car, execution style. But we knew a number of locations. We knew where his racket headquarters had been located in Brooklyn. We knew where he was last seen. So we took the team to Brooklyn, and we retraced his steps the last night of his death and the locations he had been at. And we went to the racket headquarters, and many times, and had several crazy adventures. People are still frozen. I hope people can still participate in this. Anyway.
Yeah, all that is detailed in the book, of course. And I guess the thing that you're left with is your father would have loved to have been part of that part of it, right? He would have really
he would have loved the adventure. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's where the poignance of this comes in, that he was a curious man too, and he certainly wanted to know this stuff, and you continued on without him. So
well, he also would have loved just the absolute richness of what we found out. I mean, Abe was a very complicated man. I mean, he wound up rising to be the biggest numbers runner in Brooklyn, parts of Manhattan, West Philadelphia, and North Jersey. He had territory everywhere, and was making tens of thousands of dollars every day. He had over 700 men who worked for him running numbers. Now, for those of you who don't know what running numbers is, the lottery did not become legal until 1964. So back then, if you wanted to bet on the horses or bet on numbers that were like the lottery, it was illegal. You could be arrested for that. And it was a big game that was played mostly in low-income neighborhoods. But the number runners, I mean, it seems so mild now compared to, major crimes, but that was illegal back then, and you could go to jail for it. But he was making tens of thousands of dollars a day, and he actually got into this position as what they called the racket czar of Brooklyn, because he had grown up and was best friends with Kid Twist Relis, who was the infamous murderer of Murder Incorporated. So there was a lot of learning about Murder Incorporated and the Jewish mob to really understand the world that my uncle had grown up in and how he had become who he had become.
Unless you think we have given away everything in this book,
we have not.
Revelations to come for those who are lucky enough to read the book. It's again called Line of Blood, Uncovering the Secret legacy of the 3 M's: mobsters, money, and murder. And so I think this might be a good time to see if we can get some questions from some people. Congratulations again, my friend. I'm so thrilled for you to finally score after all these years with this book. You're standing on the mountain, holding it in your hands, and I'm so happy.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I hope people aren't too frozen and they've been able to participate and listen a little bit.
Seems like a mixed performance in terms of the tech tonight. So some people have been able to see it, others it's been glitching out. But yeah, a reminder that the event is recorded, and from what we can tell on our end, we can see everything. So hopefully that's what the recording will show as well. So you guys can watch it again, or for the first time for some of you. And we'll be exploring other platforms to look at. So, all right, so everyone knows where to find the Ask a Question button, which is along the bottom here. Let's take a look at what we have, and folks can go ahead and pop their questions in there. So let's see, we've got, so Jana, while you were researching and writing your book, Line of Blood, did you carry with you a talisman or good luck charm which helped protect or inspire you in a spiritual sense or metaphorical sense?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. You know, when my father died, he gave me a silver medallion that he wore every day for 30 years. And unfortunately, my house was robbed and it was stolen. As a matter of fact, many of the things my father gave me were stolen when my house was robbed in 2014. So I didn't have that lucky charm, which I often wore. So no, I didn't. When Maria was with the psychic was with us on our adventures, she often had Palo Santo wood and would roll it around us and make sure we didn't have any evil spirits following us around. But other than the lucky saints that I wear when I fly on a plane, that was about it.
Wow. Question about, weren't you scared? The reader says, I can't sleep at night while I'm reading it.
No, but I would ask you, why are you scared? I was not scared. I wasn't worried that there were going to be a backlash from people who may have been responsible for this murder, 75 years earlier. I wasn't worried about that. There were times when I was working with the psychic that I will admit it was a little nerve-wracking to me, but I had to keep remembering that she was channeling my family, and she was channeling people who wanted me to tell their story. And so I was just like, okay, it's your family, just relax, go with it. There were a few times I found it a little nerve-wracking, like this is just weird and creepy, but it was all good. It was all good.
Cool. Have you kept in, and this is a question for me, have you kept in touch with the psychic that you worked with?
I have. Maria and I are friends. As a matter of fact, I have a feeling she's here tonight. She is wonderful. She is a truly gifted woman and went through a lot of pain to bring this story to life. She is what they call an empath. She feels all the physical symptoms of the person that she's channeling. And it was truly amazing to work with her. It was a real gift. Yeah.
Fascinating.
And I will add that many of the tips and things that we received from the psychic, we were able to verify with hard research. So a lot of times my research assistant, Eric, and I would take what she told us and then dig a little deeper to find the answers. And the pieces always wound up connecting again. It was pretty amazing.
That's incredible. Sorry, one question. I'm going to stick to the audience. I know that very early on you had written a manuscript about some of this story's details. How has this story changed from that very early draft?
Oh, I wonder who's asking me that. It started as a short story in 2009, which was the year that my father passed away. And he actually read the short story and gave me his comments on it and gave me some suggestions in how to handle the manuscript, which I am so thankful he was able to see. But I have been fortunate to work with a number of really great editors, some wonderful line editors, including my mother, Wilma, and my stepfather, John. And a wonderful friend of mine, Greg Larson, who I went to college with, who really worked with me for like 6 months on this manuscript to help me dig deeper. What did you find out about yourself, Jana? And that was the hardest part for me to really dig and find. Because my grandmother, which is where this story actually ends, that's the big ending that I'm not going to tell any of you, I knew her, so I had feelings about her, but I didn't know Uncle Abe and I didn't know Uncle Frankie. They died before I was born, and it was hard for me to dig deep to find the connection that changed me at the end of the story about them. So thank you to Greg and many people who really helped me, Spike helped me dig deeper to really understand what I had learned at the end of this.
Cool. What did you learn? Sorry, there's an echo. So, well, can you read it? Do you see it?
No, I don't think so.
What did you learn about the different power struggles between the Jewish and the Italian mob?
Oh, well, we haven't talked about that. It's funny. A lot of people don't realize that some of the most famous mobsters were Jewish. And everybody just thinks of the mob as being Italian. But, we can start as far back as Arnold Rothstein was the famous mobster who fixed the 1919 World Series. And that's a great legend, And we have Bugsy Siegel, who started Las Vegas, and Meyer Lansky, who actually created the idea of the modern crime syndicate with Lucky Luciano.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, when the Italian mafia rubbed out the end of the old, they called them the Mustache Pete's, the old world Sicilian mob, they realized that the way that modern crime needed to move forward was to embrace other ethnicities. And Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky were very entrenched in making sure that the Jewish gangsters got to work with the Italian gangsters. And together they created, with Lucky Luciano, the Modern Crime Syndicate and what we call the Commission, which is a round table of the 5 crime families of New York, as well as Al Capone in Chicago. So they really recognized the Jewish gangsters, and they all worked together at that point. That was around 1930. And one of the arms of the Italian mafia was Murder Incorporated, which was a murder for hire mob that the mafia hired to do their hits across the country so that they would not be involved in the fray. And of course, they weren't killing strangers; they were killing each other, So, but thousands and thousands of murders happened within the 10-year span that this murder for hire mob was operating. And
this guy Kid Bellis was a big part of that, right?
Well, he was the killer, yeah. And when it finally started to fall apart, and the press got wind of this group, the press actually named them Murder Incorporated. But yes, that is how a lot of the Italian and Jewish mobsters were working together. Did everybody's sound just go off? Oh no. Okay, there we go.
On my end, there's like an echo, so I'm so sorry about that, everyone. But okay, that's so interesting to hear about the.
Oh, I see somebody asked, how did you find the psychic?
Yes.
So in 1995, 96, I was working on my first book, In the Shadow of the Vampire. And I had befriended Catherine Ramsland, an amazing forensic psychologist who's written I think 68 books at this point. And she invited me to a late night ghost busting tour at La Petite Theater in New Orleans. And it was not a commercial tour. It was actually a private group of paranormal investigators who were trying to help the spirits in this theater move to the other side. In other words, they were trying to get rid of the haunting. And my research assistant, Eric, who helped me on this book, also helped me on my first book. Eric and I went to this ghost busting event. And it was there that we met Maria. And she was one of the psychics helping the spirits that were trapped at that theater move to the other side. And she was amazing. And we had some. Now, then I was scared. That was a terrifying evening, absolutely terrifying evening. I was so glad we were going home to California the next day. But that's when I met Maria, and you know, we really weren't friends. I mean, Maria didn't know anything about my family. She didn't know any of these family stories. We had just made this really lovely, friendly connection when I was in New Orleans, and then 19 years went by, and she contacted me out of the blue. I mean, it was really pretty incredible. And she said, I've been thinking about you and wanted to reconnect. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have something to ask you, you know. And so 19 years later, there we were working together on this case.
Has your experience with working successfully with her made you like interested in other psychic, you know, forums, like, I don't know, tarot or other things like that? Or, you know, has it gotten you more curious about other paranormal type of activity?
Yes, but you know, honestly, I don't think I have the stomach to do them. I mean, to be honest with you, it's very easy to get scared. You know, I mean, when you're in a seance or a ghost busting event, honestly, it's pretty scary. You know, I mean, a lot of times when a spirit is present, it will become incredibly cold in that area. The temperature drops to like 30 degrees. And it's freezing, and you can feel it. It's cold here, and it's hot over here. I mean, it's weird. And there's some stuff that's just honestly scared the crap out of me. And so I would not be well suited to go on future ghost hunting, busting events. But like I said before, I think there are some very gifted psychics out there, and you just really have to find the ones that resonate with you and that you feel are real, you know.
Yeah. Someone has asked if you can give examples of what convinced you that she truly had psychic abilities, but it sounds like, you know, based on tracing what she said and kind of finding that there was.
Well, if you read the book, you will read the chapter about when Maria and I meet for the first time after 19 years, and she comes to my home. And Maria channeled some very specific messages from my grandmother and my father that no one could have known about. I mean, very, very specific things that only they would have said to me. And it blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. And she knew things about this case that she could not have known, because although the internet was now prominent and there were many avenues available on the computer, this case was not. This case, as you read the book, you find out my uncles had basically been erased from the history books. The police had sanitized the records. And so you could not find this information online. Only if you knew the actual day that Abe Babchick was murdered, you could look it up in the New York Times. But she didn't have any of this information, and she knew very, very specific, detailed information. She described the location of his headquarters to a T. And when I looked it up on Google Maps and walked it on Google Walk, it was exactly like she said, with the black doors and an empty lot next door. I mean, there were a number of things that she was very specific about that nobody could have known.
Yeah, got to get the book, and then you can hear about it.
You will read all about it.
Question about how did your book impact others in your family?
Wow, that's a good question. I think I drove them all crazy with just telling them stories all the time. You know, I think, you know, on my father's side of the family from Brooklyn, I was not very close with many of them. You know, I had grown up in California, 3,000 miles away. We had very different lives. And when I started doing this research, it led me to calling all of them and reconnecting after many, many years. And I think one of the most beautiful parts of doing this book was that it reconnected me to this side of the family in a way that I never expected, to appreciate them in a way that I never anticipated. And a number of us came together to actually find out the truth about Uncle Abe and Cousin Leo and the crime element that ran through the family for 2 generations that nobody was aware of. So my cousin Jared, my cousin Michael, I hadn't seen either of them in 25 years. Many cousins I spoke to on the phone. And so coming together like that was wonderful. And I feel like we're all much closer now and have a connection in a very special way that we never had before. And we all now know the truth of our family.
Wow.
What's their reaction been since the publication of the book? Have you heard?
A lot of people have just been writing me wonderful notes. They love it. They're thrilled to have it. And pretty amazed. I'm pretty surprised because there is a big surprise ending here, which I'm not talking about at all in this talk. So, you know, doing the research on the uncles actually led to deeper and deeper mysteries in the family. Like one clue led to another mystery, led to another. And I wound up finding out things I never set out to find out, you know, things about my grandmother, things about Cousin Leo. So when you read the book, you'll see how the whole story comes full circle.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit about how you two know each other? Because I know your relationship goes back some time, and I'd love to hear, you know, how you two connected. And Wallace, were you just fascinated by the story? And I mean, I know you were on board from way back in the spring. You were like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for this book.
Well, I've known Jana Marcus for what, 20, 25 years? Or?
God, we've known each other forever.
Yeah. I was one of the many who sat with her dad in, you know, in his living room, drinking scotch, listening to his stories and reading his books. And of course, you know, it's interesting because I've always had very specific relationships with Mort, with Jana, and with Jana's mom, Wilma, you know, and so, yeah, I've always kind of experienced them as separate individuals. So I never really got to see that kind of bond that Jana and Mort had, but she talked about him constantly, and we used to talk about Jana and Valerie all the time.
Well, and Wallace and Shmuel Thaler gave me a Gail Rich Award in 2016. And I actually helped Wallace and Shmuel design the Gail Rich Award book that we put out in 2016. Yeah. That was a really fun art project that we did that shows all of the artists of Santa Cruz over what is
20 years. Maybe? I don't know. Is it?
Yeah, I remember that.
The creatives among us. Yeah.
Yeah.
The artists of Santa Cruz. Yeah.
And there's a wonderful photo of your dad in that book.
And a photo of my mom.
And a photo of your mom.
Wow.
So we designed that book. That was a lot of fun. So yeah, we've worked on lots of stuff together.
That's great.
Yeah.
Continuing kind of a questioning about your father. There's a question here if there was any paranormal communications from your father during the writing or after the publication of the book.
Maria did channel messages from my father, and she did say some very specific things that he would have only said to me. And I will tell you because it's so funny. She says to me, well, first she said, there's a man in your office and he's there. And I said, what does he look like? And she described him to a T. And she said, it feels like it's a father figure. And then she rolls her eyes and she says to me, this is not in the book. She rolls her eyes and she says to me, I hate it when they want me to ask you something personal, she said, because it's really none of my business. And I was like, okay, what does my father want to say to me? And she said, he wants you to know you should not spend too much on your credit card. And I started laughing because that's something my father would always say to me, you know, don't charge, don't ring up your credit cards, you know. And I was just like, oh my God. I mean, the fact that she even said that was crazy. But she channeled a number of things. And what was really interesting, I think, was that, you know, this book talks about, you know, me dealing with my father's passing. And one of the banters that my father and I always had was that I sort of believed, or at least hoped, that there was something after death. And my father did not. And for all of the spirituality in his poetry, he really believed that the end was the end. And as I wrote in the book, I used to tease him and say, well, if you do figure out you can come back, let's have a secret knock so you don't scare the hell out of me or something. And he would roll his eyes at me and tell me I was crazy. But one of the first times Maria channeled him, she said, this is really funny. He has no idea how to talk through me. She said he doesn't know how, he's trying to figure out how this all works. And it was perfect because he wouldn't have known. He never would have thought this was possible, you know. And so as time went on, she channeled several messages from him. And I really feel that the greatest gift Maria gave me, you know, was having me feel that my father's spirit was with me. You know, that helped me heal from my grief. Absolutely.
Jana, do you feel that the story is done? You dedicated the book to your nephew. Are you just kind of saying I'm out now, or has the story all been wrapped up?
I think that we come to a good conclusion at the end about what happened, who did it, and why. We even have a new theory on Abe Relis's death for Murder Incorporated, which is one of the greatest mob mysteries in history. But I think there's always a couple mysteries left to find out. And I think part of doing this book has been a generational experience for me, you know, to have heard the stories from my father, cousin Jared, hearing them from his grandpa Leo. We were the storytellers in this generation to pry open the treasure chest and find out as much as we can. And I was so excited that my nephew Zach, who's 15 now, came on the last on-the-ground investigation with us. And he may one day pick up the baton and see if there's anything else to find out. He may not care, but at least I know he will never forget the day that we were all at Lincoln Place digging through the dirt to find evidence at a place where our family story started 80 years earlier, you know? So that to me is really the beauty of all of it. It's just been the journey and bringing the family together and then passing the story on to the next generation.
Wow. That actually it's a great segue into kind of, maybe this can be the last question, which is, can you tell us about the legacy you hope your book has for your family, which you kind of just touched on, but is there more that you would want to say about that?
Oh, that's a loaded one. You know, I think the book has a very universal theme in the sense that immigrant families come to this country, whether it was 100 years ago or now, and America is the land of hope and dreams. And these immigrants come, like my grandparents, and work hard, or in this case, not work that hard, but work hard to have a life for their children to pass on. And I think that that there are several universal aspects to this book. And one is the idea of the immigrant mentality and coming to this country to better your life and work hard. Some people fall into the wrong elements, you know, they fall into gangs, whether it's the mobsters of the 1930s or gangs now or whatever it may be. But there's that story of the hope of what this country used to stand for and what it will hopefully stand for again in our next election. Everybody go vote. And what was there was something else I was going to say. I think that another really important theme in this book that is very universal to what's happening today is the idea of police corruption and police violence. It's very prevalent right now, and the real gist of this book is about police corruption and police violence. And they destroyed my family. They've destroyed many people's families. And yet the amazing irony of this story is that it was a police detective who helped me solve it. So there's many interesting things turning there. But what was the question? The question was the legacy. Was that the question? The legacy. Yeah. You know, here's what I want to end with. I tell everybody at this point, investigate your family tree. It will take you on the most amazing adventures you have ever been on. Mm-hmm. And I had another adventure, which might be my next book, going to Israel to discover cousins who had survived World War II. And so my adventures in genealogy have been life-changing for me and just amazing. And everyone's family has stories, and go and find your story. And as Wallace says, it may be painful, but it may not be painful. It may be just fascinating.
And the lessons there is that when you reach a dead end, push further, right? I mean, don't take no for an answer because you didn't.
The answer, you know what? Like they say in the X-Files, the answer is out there somewhere. The answer is out there. Someone knows something.
Yeah, it makes me think like for those of us that can access that history, it's like it's a privilege in a way because there's a lot of people, people that were brought here who were enslaved and they can't trace that history so easily. And so it's like, I think about my family history and, my Opa, my Swedish Opa is like very into the family tree. And I'm like tangentially interested, but you're making me think like, wow, I have access to that knowledge that a lot of people don't have.
And here's something else I will tell you. Talk to your relatives while they're alive. When I was 17 years old and asking my family about the genealogy, there were people alive who still knew Uncle Abe. There were people alive who were still part of that crime. Because it was the late 70s. There were people still alive. But if you wait until your 40s or 50s, when you're older, the people you may need to speak to who have the oral stories are gone. So even if you're not 100% interested right now, go and sit with your grandparents. Go and sit with your parents and ask them about their life. And one day you will treasure that.
Wow.
So in your mind, have you cast the movie of Line of Blood? I know you have. Don't deny it.
I have. Although I'm not sure where I'm going to find all these short Jewish gangsters,
And you'll have to pop it in the chat, if you have leads for the actors there. Wow. Well, such a fascinating talk. What a great pairing, Wallace and Jana. You guys were so fascinating. And to all of our very patient attendees who struggled through tech issues, thank you for bearing with us. And again, you can, shortly after this event wraps, there will be a recording available so you can watch it, hopefully more clearly. Again, a reminder to go ahead and purchase your book. I've been seeing donations pouring in and we really, really appreciate it. It's what's keeping us going. And do make sure you get copies of the book through our website or in the store. And thank you so much, everyone. I hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you so much, Carell. Thank you, Wallace. Really appreciate this.
Great. Take care.